At 12:16 p.m. on August 29, 1907, Theodore Cooper sent a telegram. Cooper was the consulting engineer for the Quebec Bridge. He was not on the bridge. He was not in Quebec. He was in New York, reading the danger through reports, letters, measurements, and messages carried by other men. The telegram was short. Add no more load to the bridge until the facts had been considered. That is the version people remember. A warning sent, a message delayed, a bridge that fell before the words could reach the men working on the steel. It is a clean story, almost too clean, because by the time Cooper sent that telegram, the bridge had already been warning them. The lower cords had bent. Men on the structure had seen it. The concern had moved up the chain. The problem had been discussed by the people who had authority over the bridge. And still, the work continued. So the real question is not only why the telegram arrived too late. The real question is why the earlier warning did not stop the work first. The Quebec Bridge was supposed to be more than a crossing. At Quebec, the St. Lawrence River narrows enough to make a bridge seem possible, but it does not narrow enough to make one easy. By the early 20th century, a railway bridge there promised money, speed, and prestige. It would connect rail lines. It would shorten freight routes. It would prove that Canadian infrastructure could master one of the hardest crossings in the country. This was not a small local project. It was a national statement in steel. The design was a cantilever. A cantilever bridge reaches outward from fixed points, with large arms balancing the weight of the span. For a deep, wide river, that method made sense. Builders did not need to fill the river with temporary supports. They could build outward from the shore, piece by piece, until the arms met across the water. But that method came with a brutal truth. The bridge did not have to wait for trains before it was tested. It tested itself while it was being built. Every new piece of steel added weight. Every member fastened into place became part of the burden the unfinished structure had to carry. The bridge was growing heavier before it was complete. It was carrying its own future before that future was safe. A train is live load. It arrives, crosses, and leaves. The bridge's own steel is dead load. It never leaves. At Quebec, dead load was not just a number in a calculation. It was steel being lifted into the air, fixed into place, and handed to a structure that was still unfinished. Every day the bridge became heavier. Every day the lower members had to carry more. And that is where the danger entered. The lower cords of the Quebec Bridge were compression members. They were meant to be squeezed by the forces moving through the cantilever. A compression member can carry enormous force when it stays within the conditions the design assumed, but it has to keep its line. When a compression member begins to bend, that is not a cosmetic problem. It is information. It means the steel is no longer behaving as the calculation expected. Theodore Cooper was experienced. His authority on the project was enormous, but he was also far away, in poor health, working from New York while the bridge rose over the St. Lawrence. That distance mattered. Cooper did not stand on the bridge and read the steel with his own eyes. He depended on a chain of communication: inspectors, letters, telegrams, company offices, reports from the site, reports from men who had to decide what was serious, what was routine, and what had to be escalated. One of those men was Norman McLure. McLure was Cooper's inspector on site. His job was to be the eyes Cooper did not have in Quebec. He watched the bridge. He recorded what it was doing. And when the lower cords began to deform, he treated it as a problem. That detail matters. The warning did not stay hidden on the bridge. It did not remain a rumor among workers. McLure saw the deformation. He escalated it. He carried the concern toward the men with authority to decide what had to happen next. The alarm moved. The work continued. This is where the clean version of the disaster begins to break. A simple story says Cooper sent a warning, the warning arrived too late, and the bridge fell. But the lower cords had been changing shape before Cooper sent that final message. Workers had noticed deformation. Experienced bridgemen knew that a member under compression was not supposed to lose its line. The structure was speaking in the only way a structure can speak. Not in words, in movement, in bent steel, in a shape that no longer matched the drawing. The people on the bridge were not abstractions in an engineering file. Many were skilled ironworkers who knew high steel, tools, rivets, wind, height, and risk. A large number came from the Mohawk ironworking community at Kahnawake, in Kahnawake, near Montreal. That community had already built a reputation across North American construction sites. They were not reading the calculations. They were standing on them. They worked on an unfinished arm of steel over the St. Lawrence. They moved across members, platforms, cranes, and temporary access roads. Beneath them was water. Around them was noise. Above them was a project sold as proof of modern engineering. But the bridge was already carrying more than the design had allowed. The Royal Commission would later conclude that the actual dead load of the bridge was greater than the calculations had assumed. The lower chords were being asked to carry forces they had not been adequately designed to carry. That was not a small error sitting quietly in a notebook. It had become steel. It had become weight. It had become men standing over a river on members already showing distress. In early August, the concern reached Cooper. The bridge was still standing, but the warning was already inside the system. The lower chords were reported as bent. Cooper asked how they had become bent. The question itself revealed the danger. If the members had always been that way, the problem might be explained as fabrication or fit. But if they were bending more as load was added, then the bridge was not merely imperfect. It was changing under stress. Between early August and the final week of the month, the concern did not disappear. Letters moved, telegrams moved, discussions happened, measurements changed. The bridge kept growing heavier. But a discussion does not remove weight from a bridge. By August 27th, the issue was no longer a distant worry in an engineer's correspondence. The deformation had become serious enough that work was locally halted, at least for a time, while McLure moved to put the problem directly before Cooper. That should have been the moment when warning became action, but a local halt is not the same thing as a final stop. The bridge had changed shape in front of them. The warning had moved through the chain, and still the men on the bridge had not received the one instruction that mattered: stop. That is the most disturbing part of the story. Not that the bridge failed, but that the bridge had already shown them how it was going to fail. The lower chords were bending. The issue had been escalated. The danger was being discussed by people who had the power to stop construction. And still, by the afternoon of August 29th, men were on the bridge. The structure was still taking load. At 12:16 p.m., Cooper finally made the instruction explicit: add no more load to the bridge until the facts had been considered. It was a serious message. It showed that Cooper understood the situation had become dangerous enough to stop adding weight. But that is exactly why the telegram cannot be treated as the first warning. A man does not send a stop-load instruction from nothing. The telegram was produced by earlier reports, earlier deformation, earlier anxiety, earlier discussions. It was not the birth of the danger. It was the written proof that the danger had finally become impossible to ignore. The words left New York while the bridge was still standing. But the words were not on the bridge. They had to pass through the same world that had already slowed the earlier warning: offices, company channels, relay, delivery, interpretation. Someone still had to turn a telegram into action at the site. The message was moving. The bridge was carrying. Those were not the same thing. At 5:37 p.m., the south arm failed. The collapse began in the lower chords of the anchor arm. In a cantilever bridge, the anchor arm helps hold back the arm reaching toward the center of the river. It is part of the balance that keeps the unfinished structure from falling while it grows outward. At Quebec, those lower chords were under heavy compression. They had already shown deformation. When they could no longer carry the force, the cantilever could no longer remain the structure it was supposed to be. In the final moment, the physics became simple. The arm that could no longer hold itself moved toward the river. Thousands of tons of steel stopped being a bridge and became motion. For the men on the structure, this was not an engineering conclusion. It was the ground beneath them changing state. A bridge under construction is a workplace. Men walk it, trust it, lean into it, carry tools across it, stand on members that are supposed to remain members. Then in seconds, the place they were working became wreckage. 75 men died in the 1907 collapse, according to the Royal Commission's record. Later summaries sometimes give slightly different numbers, but the scale of the loss is not in dispute. The south arm was in the river. The official record preserved calculations, correspondence, company rolls, engineering testimony. and the names of men in authority far more completely than it preserved the lives of the men on the steel. That imbalance is part of the story. The inquiry asked what the bridge had been designed to carry, what it was actually carrying, and why the difference had not been caught in time. Its answer did not blame a worker on the bridge. It did not reduce the disaster to one missed message. It found a failure of design and checking. The dead load had been underestimated. The lower cords were not adequately designed for the compression they were actually asked to carry. The review process that should have caught the problem allowed it to pass from calculation into fabrication, and from fabrication into the bridge itself. By the time the lower cords bent, the mistake was no longer on paper. It was holding men over the river. The telegram matters because it proves Cooper understood the danger was real. But it also proves the danger did not begin at 1216. The danger had been building through reports, visible deformation, and every hour the structure remained loaded while authority was still deciding what the warning meant. The clean story puts the disaster in the final minutes. The record pushes it further back. The bridge had warned them before the telegram. The lower cords had bent before the final instruction. The system had received danger before it returned an order to stop. And that is the part that matters most. A warning is not enough if it remains inside a chain of discussion. A warning is not enough if men keep working while authority weighs whether the danger is serious. A warning is not enough if the structure is already telling the truth faster than the system can accept it. The Quebec Bridge did not fall because steel failed without warning. It fell after the warning had already entered the system, and the system did not answer in time. The bridge would later be rebuilt. The project would suffer another collapse in 1916 when the center span fell during construction. More lives were lost. Eventually, the completed Quebec Bridge would stand as a landmark of civil engineering. That later achievement cannot erase what happened in 1907. Before the bridge became a landmark, it became a warning. A warning about dead load, a warning about checking, a warning about distance between authority and reality, a warning about what happens when a structure speaks clearly, but the system around it keeps working as if there is still time. The popular version ends with Cooper's telegram arriving too late, but that is not where the failure began. The telegram was not the failed warning, it was the receipt. The bridge had already sent the warning in steel.